I did serve 6 months at the Papers Abraham Lincoln on a fellowship. It's in the old state capitol. It's a great building if you ever get to go to the old state capitol where Lincoln gave his House Divided speech. And so I have a lot of background on Lincoln. And that was a fascinating learn as well. But Abraham Lincoln is not, although the people that work there a lot of times will believe this, is not the wholesome figure that we always want to portray him as. But because Lincoln in his day is definitely somewhat derided. Have you ever seen this picture? Lincoln in a cloak, coat coming through. Anybody know where that's from? What's that a reference to?
Going to his inauguration.
Right, going to his inauguration. Alan Pinkerton, probably one of the people that helped get McClellan fired because he's an idiot, told Lincoln there was an assassination plot, and so Lincoln sneaks through Baltimore in the middle of the night instead of stopping, and that's a thing to make fun of him. Then, of course, while he's alive, he's derided all the time, fairly regularly. But as soon as he gets martyred, we have huge monuments to him. Okay. He freed the slaves. He's a great egalitarian. But he's also, as you'll learn today, the person that commuted the most death sentences of any president in history, as well as the person that executed more people than anybody in history. Did anybody know that before? Well, this is Lincoln's birth cabin, allegedly. Go ahead. And when you get into it, you have to walk through this. It's in Kentucky, the Lincoln birthplace. I call it the Parthenon. Because we built these great monuments to great people, and Lincoln obviously is seen as great after his death. This is a funeral train route. If you've never seen this, there's actually a book out that's fascinating about Lincoln's funeral train because of the new process of embalming. Embalming became very new at the era, and to try to preserve Lincoln's body over the month-long trip, because he laid in state in each of these like 7 or 8 cities in the north, is amazing. They said his skin was basically black by the time he got to Springfield. They just caked on makeup. But we always thought there were no pictures of Lincoln laying in state because Edwin Stanton did not want any of them. But a young 14-year-old one day looking through the Illinois State Historical Society about 1950 found some pictures of Lincoln laying in state that Stanton had taken and saved and put in this archive. Can you imagine you're a 14-year-old? I mean, that's it could be one of your students finding these pictures that are now famous. And this kid went on to be a historian, and he's still a historian at Cal State Fullerton. He might have just retired. But the importance of this is just how Lincoln's reputation changed based on assassination. I mean, West Michigan voted for McClellan in 1864, so he wasn't all that popular just before he died. It's the last time West Michigan has gone Democrat. So significant that they estimate that 1/3 of the entire American population saw Lincoln's train or laying in state. And that's a fascinating figure. You think about John Paul II's funeral, I mean, per capita, that doesn't even rate compared to what people saw Lincoln. 100,000 people enter Springfield, Illinois, which is about the size of the city today, when it was only a size of 3,000. There's stories about people sleeping on porches and laying in yards and just strewn everywhere. And there's a picture actually of it, a painting of it in Springfield, and there's just a line of people just miles and miles long waiting to walk by this guy's body. Excuse me. So he obviously is a great American hero to our students. Everybody's heard of him. He's on the $5 bill. This is his 200th celebration. But how real is that as far as greatness? I mean, my argument would be he's a great politician. Is he a great humanitarian? Well, that would be a debate we can have for a long, long time. But as a politician, I don't think there's anybody ever better. And if you've read Team of Rivals, I think that's overblown as how great he is as well. But that's generally the idea. Now, Lincoln grows up in what's called the Northwest, right? The Northwest Ordinance. Remember what's significant about the Northwest Ordinance? Peter?
First place that banned slavery.
First place to ban slavery. When the white boys in the South, like Gleaves and me that come from the South, started realizing that, hey, you Yankees don't like slavery so much. And after that, you really see the slave power conspiracy kick in. The rich Southern white boys that owned slaves, preventing any kind of discussion of stopping the expansion of slavery. Because remember, the platform of Lincoln in the 1860s, anybody remember what it was? The key Republican piece of the platform?
Stop slavery.
Stop the expansion of slavery. Lincoln says in his inaugural address he'll leave slavery alone where it is. He has no desire to end slavery. And then his letter to Horace Greeley, you know, the famous quote is, am I drawing a blank here?
If I could save
the Union, right. If I could slay the Union by freeing all the slaves, I'd do that. If I could save the Union by freeing none of them, I'd do that. So Lincoln's mentality is this Midwest mentality, which is very important. And Michigan, statistically, is the most segregated state in the country, I tell my students, which is true. But I'd argue it's mostly because of the Northwest Ordinance, because it bans slavery, right? Why does it ban slavery? Any ideas why they banned slavery? I mean, this is 1787. Right before the Constitutional Convention, they banned slavery. It's the only successful piece of legislation in the Articles of Confederation, period. Any idea why they banned slavery in this area?
There's no need.
No need for it.
No economic.
Really? You don't think they could be great farmers and mass plantation crops? Very good. Kirk, you got a family, you're probably 21, you're living in Boston, working in some factory. You got 2 kids, maybe 4 kids by 21. But let's say you're 22 and you got 4 kids. What's your dream?
Own your own land.
Own your own land. So you're going to go out west and buy your own land. Well, if I show up from Texas with 18 slaves and buy a bunch of land right next to you, what's going to happen to your plot?
You're probably going to buy it.
You're going to take that land over with your slaves?
Sure. I'm more efficient with slavery. I mean, slavery is an efficient form of labor. Of course, it's a terrible way to treat people, but it's efficient labor-wise. And so Kirk's going to be, it's like Walmart versus Main Street store, right? People go to Walmart, why? Cheaper. Okay, so I'm going to drive Kirk out of business, who has just spent every penny he has to bring his family out to Grand Rapids, Michigan. Okay, so that's the mentality of the Midwesterner. Kirk does not want slaves around, right? Does he care about black people, probably? Does Abraham Lincoln really care about black people? Probably not a whole lot. He has some interactions, and that's a myth. There's a good article, actually, on that, how much he interacts with black people. But he supports slave owners as a lawyer and also supports people that are trying to free slaves under the Fugitive Slave Act. So he does both. He's a lawyer. So that's his mentality of Lincoln. He does not care about slavery as much as he cares about making sure his colleagues in Illinois, his constituents in Illinois, can go west and have their own land and not get driven out of business. Are you with me on that? Of course, what's not even being considered in any of this? Well, the West is largely occupied by American Indians, and so American Indians are really an afterthought for all these people. Lincoln's grandfather, whose name is Abraham Lincoln, was actually killed by an American Indian in Kentucky. But he never really expresses a great hatred for American Indians, because I'm not sure how uncommon that was for people to have their relatives killed by an American Indian. So when Lincoln moves to Illinois, anybody know what his military experience is?
Black Hawk War.
The Black Hawk War. You can go to the next one. Oh, that's another thing about memory. Second most visited cemetery in America. It's this tiny cemetery. Well, it's not that tiny, but it's tiny compared to Arlington, which is the most recognized. And if you've never been there, that's Lincoln's tomb. And we can tell about the story about people trying to steal Lincoln's body in like 19th century or late 18th century. Okay. New Salem, Illinois is where Lincoln lives when the Black Hawk War breaks out. Of course, it looks Western, doesn't he? It looks Western. Me, I look cold, man. I was moving from Arizona to Springfield. I thought that was hell until I moved to Grand Rapids from Arizona. Now, like, wow. I never shoveled snow in my life before I moved here. Illinois wasn't that bad.
It was the day I went to New Salem the first time.
Yeah?
15 degrees and froze, and there was nothing that was heated.
How rural is New Salem still today?
Extremely.
Very rural. So you can imagine what it was like when Abraham Lincoln lived there and got in a boxing match with what's his name. But he's a rural guy. He's a farmer, the rail splitter. He actually runs a store. He's not a farmer. And he's a surveyor. But most of the people around there are farmers. So he's a Midwestern rural mentality guy. And the Black Hawk War, does anyone know what the Black Hawk War is about?
Kicking the fox and the sack out of territory east of the Mississippi, and they didn't want to go.
Right.
And they made them go.
It's all part of removal. Too often remember removal of Indians is only the Cherokee and the 5, quote, civilized tribes in the South. But there's all up through the Northwest, in the Midwest, are tribes removed under the Black Hawk War. Is just one of the wars that was fought to get the Indians to move into Indian territory. And Lincoln takes part.